1999. Had we been there, it would have been a disaster with my two beautiful team members here and young ladies who God looked after them and after me. I am here because I want to show you something. This fantastic painting that has been with the 13 episodes of Beirut Institute Summit e-policy circles, 52 guests from 22 countries was at the skyline, at where we were doing the e-policy circles. I rescued it, but it's missing parts, as you could see. And even the name of the artist, Yahya al-Warraq, it's gone. So I decided to mount it on a canvas to say to the world, you know what, we can rebuild. We can, pick up our pieces and say, we'll make it work somehow. It's not the original, it doesn't have the signature, but it has the presence. And that's Beirut. And Beirut will come back again with your help, with your attention, and the whole country needs your input. You are incredible leaders of incredible institutions. And I know the Lebanese people are appealing to you to see how you can help, because there is a violation of the Lebanese people that's going on, multiple violations. I won't take any more of your time, and I won't get any more emotional, but I want to start by welcoming you. You are personal friends, and you honor me repeatedly by accepting to be together for this very special e-policy circle that is a tribute to Beirut. I want to start with President Michelle Bachelet, who is a very good friend from many, many years throughout the United Nations and before and beyond, and after she had become president of Chile. Each of you will have 4 minutes to tell me what you think. We always take the conversation forward, and we look forward to what you are going to tell us, how to think, what to do, how to hope. Michelle Bachelet, 4 minutes to you.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Raghida. But I will focus my remarks today in the situation in Lebanon. However, before I do, I would like to frame my remarks within a wider context that is affecting Lebanon, but the rest of the world as well. As I said when addressing the Human Rights Council earlier this week, the world has rarely experienced a simultaneous global shock as complex as COVID-19. And no region has been spared. This is not less true for the Middle East and North Africa region, which has also continued to be impacted by situations of armed conflict and related violations of international human rights and law in some states. And the impact of the pandemic on the region has been significant because in the addition to the loss of life, lockdowns and other restrictions imposed have had a significant impact on people's daily lives. And the overall economic impact of the pandemic has also been unprecedented and will likely fall on those in the most vulnerable situations. For many has meant as well restrictions on the freedom of opinion, expression, religion or belief, assembly, and association in some states have also had a negative impact on civic and digital space and have generated serious concern, particularly in the context of some states' responses to protest. And so in this context of this sharply escalating suffering and turmoil, I believe that human rights principle norms and actions offer effective solutions to build strong resilience to shocks and counter despair by preventing social, economic, and political instability. And of course, I think that the current situation in Lebanon clearly illustrates this. Before I elaborate, however, I would like first of all to reiterate my deepest condolences for the loss of life and injury in Lebanon, and to also reiterate my personal solidarity with the people of Lebanon following the horrific explosions last month. And I also reiterate the Secretary General's statement following the explosion, in which he emphasized that the United Nations will stand with the country in such challenging times. So my central message today is that the new government of Lebanon, when established, the international community and the United Nations must collectively place human rights at the center of the short-term response and the long-term recovery. It is critical that human rights is integrated into the emergency response to address the needs of all affected populations. The United Nations issued a flash appeal and is working together to support the population on the ground. And my office in Beirut is supporting such efforts. Furthermore, as protests continue in Beirut, the authority must ensure the protection of the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly, expression, and opinion. There is also an equally urgent need for all political stakeholders in Lebanon to come together to agree on a way forward, including through implementing an economic and institutional reform agenda to address the grievances of the people. And this reform should realize and not undermine the rights of the population. I think it's important to note that the explosion has exacerbated the pre-existing socioeconomic and rights crisis in the country. I remember last year when Lebanon started, people on the street, young people on the streets. I remember this impressive image of a girl sitting, standing in front of like tanks and security forces. So I think we already have, I mean, there are root the pre-existing condition needs to be addressed. There is, of course, sovereign debt default, a collapse in the national currency, rising prices of food and medicines, and of course, added now the economic shock of the COVID-19 lockdown measures that already undermine the realization of people's economic and social rights, and the situation has now deteriorated further of the impact of the explosion. Mm-hmm. Accordingly, the government will need to pay particular attention for those in the most vulnerable situations, including those living in poverty and displaced by the explosions. Thank you again, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Michelle Bachelet. You spoke about human rights, and that must be placed at the front and center of the issues in Lebanon. How do you feel human rights are being violated of the Lebanese citizen? I mean, is the citizen of Lebanon, are the Lebanese people suffering from the violation of their human rights by a clique of politicians who are not allowing it, government included, all kinds of people in and out of government, but in government, that are not allowing the country to receive aid or a rescue package from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Is this a violation of my right as a Lebanese that I can't get that rescue?
Well, I think that government should do anything possible to diminish the grievances of the people. And of course, if there are adequate, and of course, maybe our colleague from World Bank would talk more about that, if there are some solutions or possible solutions under, if I would say, reasonable conditions, because sometimes there are offers that are not under reasonable conditions for a country to receive, that should be received, of course. But I think there can be different ways of violating human rights. If there is, I mean, I know that sometimes there are violence. Some protesters do commit violence act, and I understand also if policemen died. But there's no, and if there is any violence, it's the states who violate the human rights, and it should be protected, the peaceful assembly and the peaceful participation. And lastly, I think when you have problems, the main thing, first of all, freedom of information, transparency in the information, and also people's participation, because it's that what people feel, that they don't have probably the spaces to hear their voices heard, to hear their voices heard, and to really be able to influence in the process.
All right. I'm going to leave you with a thought, and I really would like to push you on that a little later. How is it not a violation of the human rights of a Lebanese citizen if its government, if it's the presidencies, the first and second and third presidencies, are not doing the right thing by the people in the sense of accepting international aid, accepting international intervention, accepting a rescue package? How is that not a violation and of the human rights of the Lebanese citizen? Please think about that while I go to Peter Maurer. And 4 minutes to you, Peter Maurer, about the International Red Cross and where shall we go from here? I know that the Lebanese Red Cross is doing a great job, and so are you, but I really need to know, where do we go from here, given the devastation and given the magnificent, incredible downfall of this country with no way forward? Peter Maurer, 4 minutes to you.
Thanks a lot, Raghida, and colleagues. I would limit my remarks to 4 brief points. My first is really an element of pride to the Lebanese Red Cross, as well as to the partnership within the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement for fast and accurate reaction to the blast, but also for the reaction over the last years and decades in the context of Lebanon. I think if you have such a stellar national society in Lebanon, it is also because you have gone through civil war in Lebanon, and it has built capacities. And I was immensely proud about the speed and accuracy of the reaction, helping hospitals, helping people, helping ambulances, organizing and building the support within a couple of hours to at least mitigate the worst. And I think the Lebanese Red Cross and the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, including ICRC, stand in that sense for the importance of humanitarian law and principles. Here I would join, just from my angle, Michelle's comments. My second point would be that I look at what happened in Lebanon a little bit as an emblematic turning point for humanitarian action today. We all remember we have been used to look at humanitarian either as induced because of natural disaster or of man-made conflict and violence. I think what happened in Lebanon draws the attention to governance weakness and failures as an origin of humanitarian needs. And I think that Lebanon, in that sense, is not a singular case, but emblematic. I come home from trips to Libya, to Niger, to Burkina Faso, I have been in the Lake Chad Basin and Somalia at the beginning of this year. I think in many places of the world, we see that humanitarian needs emerge when we have serious governance problems. And this is, of course, an additional challenge, I think, to the UN system, because it is constituted by governance, but also to the Red Cross system, in which national societies are the auxiliaries of governments. And so we have to think profoundly on how we can respond and what the accurate framework for response is when we are not in a clear-cut system of conflict, war, and violence, or of natural disaster, which was our usual template. My third remark is one of frustration. I mean, how many times have humanitarian actors, development actors, many others drawn the attention over the last 20 years to the strategic neglect of Lebanon, in particular in the last decade, of strategic neglect of Lebanon and the Lebanese people, given the extraordinary power competition in the region, with its conflictual impact and with unbearable impact on the social fabric of the neighboring country. And I think it is a little bit out of frustration also that it needed a blast to get attention of the international community and just recognition that what the international community has allowed to be created in Beirut and in Lebanon is unsustainable in terms of what the international system should do in order to prepare and prevent. And the last point, let me just say that our action with the Lebanese Red Cross, with the Lebanese people, our work on some critical humanitarian issues have strengthened my conviction that it is one of the most promising countries, but it needs the potential to be unlocked. So what does it need to unlock this potential? I think we should have a solid discussion on these issues.
We definitely will, Peter Maurer. This is incredibly helpful because you took me in a place where I want to go about the governance failure and accountability. governance failure, if it goes on without accountability, then what is the value of the international community if it's there watching and reading from the textbook? There has to be accountability for the governance and failure and government's failure, and particularly in light of what you call strategic neglect of Lebanon, which is, I find this a very powerful framing of the issue. Peter Maurer, quickly, can you tell me, is it the failure also of the international community that it just lets them get away with it while the people suffer?
Well, I do believe that the international community always needs interest and motives to get engaged, and I do believe that the focus was on the conflict dynamics in the neighboring countries and not on the impact on Lebanon. And I think it is this situation of lack of focus and lack of acceptance of the reality also that are created through conflict. We have seen it in Lebanon, we have seen it in many other places. Let's remind ourselves that the most fragile context in countries at war.
And we're going to discuss that at length, and I want to bring in back Michelle Bachelet into this discussion. But I want to go right now to Valerie Amos, who's got congratulations from Oxford. At Oxford, we are very proud of you, and we remember you from the UN. Again, you're a good old friend, and I remember how strong you are on these issues, and I know that you are still strong on the issue of ending impunity, accountability. I'm not going to put words in your mouth now, but I want to get back to you after your 4 minutes to just take those 2 points forward. Valerie Amos, 4 minutes to you, please.
Thank you. And can I join others in giving condolences to the people of Lebanon and the people of Beirut? It has been a terrible few weeks, and my heart goes out to everyone. My comments pick up absolutely from where Peter left off, particularly in relation to these issues around governance failure and accountability. I saw many times at the UN, and I've seen it since, the way in which governments have responded to crises, particularly humanitarian crises. And I'm extremely concerned that over the years, I think we are seeing 2 particular things which are happening. One is a response which in many ways is ideological and political by governments. So they frame who gets the help, why they get it, in terms of those who are, as it were, on their side. And there is a lack of care for the people in the country in the way that they do this. I saw this very often with Syria, but also elsewhere. But increasingly, and this is what really concerns me, we are seeing incompetence in the way that governments are responding to these crises. So it is not an ideological response per se, but it is also incompetence, because quite often the ideological response has eroded key elements of a state response. So a state is no longer able to respond in an effective way. And the COVID pandemic, I think, has really shone a light on this. We saw in the United States, for example, initially the denial that COVID was serious. We've seen the way that the communications have gone from one side to another. In my own country here in the United Kingdom, we have seen in procurement and also in the way that we have put a testing regime in place, a lot of people complaining about the length of time that has taken and the incompetence that is at the heart of that. Don't get me wrong, I know that any government would be challenged in relation to responding to COVID, but this is about elements that demonstrate incompetence. And both of these, I think, were very evident in Lebanon when we saw the response to the explosion. A slow response, a refusal of international help. with a history of a country with a toxic political environment, the continuation of the conflict in Syria, and that impacting in a very negative way on Lebanon. We know about the refugee flows, but in other areas as well. But also in terms of the region, significant geopolitical shifts. Recently, the impact of diplomatic normalization deals between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain, all taking attention away from particularly what is happening in Lebanon, and the international community holding Lebanon to account. And this brings me to my final 2 points. One is in relation to the importance of multilateralism and what the current context tells us about the importance of that multilateralism. The pandemic response is one element of that, but the report that came out yesterday from the UN in relation to climate change and biodiversity and the impact of that on our countries going forward. We need multilateralism now more than ever before. So where is the positivity? And I know you want me to stop, but where is the positivity? I'm really encouraged by the citizens of those countries across the world and what they're doing. If we look at the response to Black Lives Matter, for example, if we look to the response to climate change, if we look to the response of the people in Lebanon, in Belarus, and everywhere, other countries where their governments have become increasingly authoritarian and where their governments are incompetent, that, I think, is where the positivity lies.
Thank you very much, Valerie. Amos, you know, you spoke of, and I want you to be very quick on this because we're already almost a half an hour in. You spoke of the ideological versus the, what did you call it now? I wrote it down. I don't have my glasses on.
I said ideological and incompetence.
Right, and so, well, lucky us, we have both. We have totally both in this country. And so probably Ferid Belhaj is going to tell us how we failed in both, because he's been based here before and they've been doing some work on and I'm sure it's about the total incompetence, but the ideological is driving this. Is it wrong that the international community, Valerie Amos, has been quite accommodating rather of the regional players interfering in this country and, you know, taking it as if it's their own? You know, there are regional players who have decided that they will run the course in this country, and this is the ideological part I'm talking about. And of course, I'm talking about Iran. What is to be done about this sort of thing, Valerie Amos?
So I think I would say 2 things. One is that I think the pandemic has allowed a lack of accountability, in the sense that it has taken the eyes off the ball of many things that are going on in many parts of the world, including in Lebanon. So we are not seeing that overarching scrutiny, which comes not just from the international community, but also from the media as a whole. But I think the second thing, which is very important in relation to this, is that we are seeing countries that are members of the Security Council. I'm thinking particularly, for example, of the United States, which has stated very, very clearly not only an America First policy, but has been scathing in its criticism of a multilateral approach. So it's enabled other countries to stay very quiet in the face of these attacks on accountability and on multilateralism.
Oh, thank you very much, Valerie Amos. I need to go to you, Ferid Belhaj, because a lot of Lebanese are waiting to hear what you've got to say. Because, as I said, not only because you've been here, but also you're the World Bank, and you also know you work in closely with the IMF, and I'm sure you're going to tell me something beyond what we know, in as far as the good work that you've done with the Bisri, what is it called, the Bisri Dam, sticking in Arabic, and the report that you have done in the assessment of damages. Please take it beyond, because people are eager to hear what do you have to say. How do they get out of this mess? What help are you bringing? Is it possible that we can do anything if there are no reforms? Ferid Belhaj, 4 minutes to you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Raghida. I'm very pleased and honored to be with this distinguished panel. Thank you for the invitation. let me join in stating how emotional the whole Beirut blast was for all of us and for me personally. I lived 5 years there, not very far from where this happened, and I have colleagues, friends who have been, affected by this. You talked about the Skyline building. I have friends and colleagues living there, and some of them badly hurt. So it is personal for us. But let me take a step back just a bit and talk a bit about the Middle East and North Africa region and how much, what's happening there is actually a reflection of what's happening in Lebanon and vice versa. In two
Ferid,
words.
can I ask you to do it the other way around? I'll tell you why, because a lot of television stations are waiting for you to say what you have to say on Lebanon, because the broadcast is being prepared. So we can get into, if you don't mind, forgive me for imposing on you, but I got note that they want to hear from you on Lebanon right away. Otherwise, I'm fired.
No, we don't want that. Look, what's happening in Lebanon, let me say, is a result of years of what I would say, call in Arabic, la mubalat, carelessness. Peter said neglect. This is what's happening, and it is a neglect that cannot continue. When we looked at what happened on the 4th of August, a day after that, we moved ahead with the rapid damage and needs assessment. And what came out of it is not only a number that, how much this is costing, not only a number, that is how many of these buildings were shattered and how many people, but also, frankly, the need for this country to move beyond what happened to it. Because this is self-inflicted. This is self-inflicted. And I think this is what's very, very important. For once, we cannot turn left, up, down, and say it's somebody else. And why is it? Because there is no governance, because there is no accountability, because there is no contestability, because the social contract between the citizen and the state has been shattered. And this is not new, So this is where we are coming from. And that's why I wanted to bridge it with MENA, because unfortunately, in all of the countries in MENA, we have the same issues of lack of accountability, lack of contestability, lack of transparency. I'll finish with this. At the end of this report, we say we need a strategy. We need to do something. We cannot just assess. And we have put together a plan that we are working on with the UN, with the EU, and with others, to look at 3 R's: reconstruction, recovery, and reforms. For me, it is 3 R's: reforms, reforms, reforms. Because if you look at the situation today, of course, tomorrow we can rebuild. And of course, tomorrow we can recover. But nothing will be sustained and sustainable if you don't reform your judicial system, if you don't reform your procurement system, if you don't reform your governance system, if you don't take another look at your financial system. Because all of these are converging into one thing: the disaster that happened on the 4th of August in Beirut.
Belhaj, if they, كلهم we say in Arabic, which means all of them, if they are refusing to reform, what's going to happen to this country?
They have been refusing to reform for years. When we look at the electricity sector, for instance, you live there, you know it. Between $1.5 and $2 billion a year of money that is going down the drain. Why? Because the place is managed in a less than rational way. So we have been pushing electricity reform for years. We are pushing water reform. We are pushing connectivity reform. And again, overall, contestability, transparency, and governance. And these are not empty words, because there's something behind that. There is something called a new procurement law that would allow people, that would allow actually the state to be able to contract in a transparent way, that would allow civil society to take a look at what's happening. You mentioned earlier the issue of making sure that we do something beyond this assessment.
Yeah.
We are here and we will do something behind it, but the condition is that reforms move forward. We had Paris 1, Paris 2, Paris 3, we have said, and nothing happened.
You can put conditions as much as you want, and they're not doing them. They're not meeting them. This question is to all 4 of you. When the clique of that runs the country, political and otherwise, They refuse to listen to all of what you're saying. All of you said, reform, pay attention to your citizen, do not, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. You know what you said. When they all refuse, and they are refusing, and there is no government today, and there might not be a government, what is the response? What can be done? I don't want to lay the blame on you, obviously. You tell the Lebanese people, you do something about it. Every time the Lebanese people go out on the street, they got beat up. What is it that that can be done? Should we go to the Security Council? Should we go to you, Michelle Bachelet, and say, listen, there is a Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act in the United States. Why shouldn't it apply to Lebanon? Michelle Bachelet.
Well, I think, first of all, that the main problem is a political one. I mean, they don't have, they are not, I mean, I'm not an expert on Lebanon's politics, but what I do know is that, for example, the IMF for months had been negotiating a lot of a package of reforms, but they have not been accepted by some people in the government. Maybe some are pro reforms and some are not. But when I think on how the governments are conformed in Lebanon, with that multiplicity, the solution, the formula who came after the conflicts in the past, I have been in government, and I'm not sure that you can be in a government when you have people who think so differently. How could you advance when you have people that are so completely separated in terms of some people who can speak and said, we need to fight corruption through many of the reforms that Ferid was mentioning, and some other people don't want to lose the privileges.
Then why, Michelle Bachelet? Then in that case, what is wrong with the Magnitsky, the global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act, which allows, in the case of the United States, the US government to sanction foreign government officials implicated in human rights abuses anywhere in the world? These officials are abusing our human rights by refusing accountability, by refusing reform, Michelle Bachelet. Why can't this be taken up by the Human Rights Commission?
Well, I mean, do you mean the council?
But any which way you want.
No, but
you said, can I hear from you on that? Should the government officials be sanctioned because they're not allowing us to get relief?
Well, I think first of all, I think we need to work with the government to engage them in a solution, because of course they are not respecting the rights of the people when they permit that grievances exist, and we need the population is suffering, and the rights are diminished. So the government must honor its commitment, whether it is a package from the IMF or another. Of course, the problem of this is that it's a sovereign decision. But if it's a sovereign decision, I think we have to urge them for a peaceful resolution. And of course, countries can use other kinds of actions. But on the Human Rights Council, and I want to mention of something that was discussed by Valerie before, and also by Peter. I mean, on the accountability, on the commitment of the international community. Today, the world is very polarized. And Valerie, I'm not going to repeat what they said, but it's very difficult to get any decision, for example, in the Security Council, because there will be countries who are not accepted. And in the Human Rights Council, it's the same. When there are certain delicate situations or controversial situations, and they vote, not every time, those votes really can represent what everybody wants. So I think something can be done, but it will be needed to have some countries who propose that actions, and because that's a member state issue, it's not an issue from the office. We cannot act on this regard. Yeah. So it's very complicated.
Yeah, maybe it's time in cases like this to think out of the box. Probably, let me go to Valerie.
Can I come in?
Sorry, I can't think out of the box, but I represent the UN. I don't represent myself.
But that's why we need the UN needs to be rehashed. Globalization, the talk of globalization, and forget about unilateralism when the UN is really failing in thinking out of the box. We need to. I mean, I'm the daughter of the UN, as you all know. I spent 40 years at the UN.
But the UN are not the bureaucrats. Us. The UN is the 193 member states.
And I'm against this upholding the issue of sovereignty above all, because there is really something important that we have to listen to.
But that is, but that...
I just want to go to Peter Maurer, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Raghida. Can I just inject two thoughts? Yes. If states and international institutions fail mechanisms which were devised are not functioning. From my modest Red Cross perspective, I say that's the moment of civil society to get organized and to do the best it can to deliver services. And I think that's what we try to do in a limited space of humanitarian action and basic needs and social services, as we have done in the past. But let's never forget that accountability mechanisms, international mechanisms, pressures, sanctions, legal accountability will only work if there is a broad movement and willingness to make them work. And it seems to me we are not there yet, despite all the difficulties. What I would envisage in contrary is that we have to strengthen further institutions of the civil society in order to be able to deliver services. I think, again, the Lebanese Red Cross is a good institution. There are a couple of other institutions which can deliver services. We need to recast the capacity of the Lebanese society to take basic needs into their hand and basic social services into their hand, which doesn't mean that I'm against everything which you have said and put on the table, Raghida, but we seem, in terms of the power reality as I read it, not there to make these mechanisms work. So pending a broader movement, that's probably what I can offer. Secondly, I think we need to inject into any discussion on the accountability power reality. I don't know any place in the world where accountability works without taking into account what the power balance in a country is. You can't you can't discuss away those who have the power. You have to engage at least. This is the recipe which the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement uses in order to deliver services.
Peter Maurer, I'm going to have to go to Valerie Amos on that, but please, I mean, you know, when you see that there is a total dysfunctional entity in this country, that actually they are very functional. It's that they made this country dysfunctional. And you see it in your own eyes and you know what's going on, including refusing an IMF package, including resisting what the World Bank was to say, including juxtaposing the priorities of regional states on the Lebanese individual. You can't just go to the traditional equation, Peter Maurer. I want to get back to you on this, but I want to hear from Valerie Amos and then from Ferid Belhaj on this.
I'm not going to the traditional equation. I'm just saying you have then to strengthen civil society organization to get organized.
Valerie Amos, shooting of protesters, please. I know you would have something to say about that. Should that not be, you know, something that governments are held responsible for when they're shooting protesters? Valerie Amos, please.
Of course, governments should be held responsible for it, but I think the thing that we are all grappling with here, and it's a very, very difficult thing to accept, is that we have reached a kind of impasse. We all recognize that multilateralism is key, that accountability is key, that the structures that we have in place at the moment in the UN, the Security Council, the Human Rights Council are key in all of this. But because of the power which is being exercised by individual powerful member states, because of the proxy wars which are going on across the world, multilateralism has increasingly become impossible. So what we need to look for, and you yourself talked about, you know, the importance of thinking about outside the box. What we need to look for is how can we create some opportunities out of the crisis, the different crises which we have on the table. And one of the things that Peter talked about was strengthening civil society. And in that sense, I am talking about the same thing, but in a slightly different way. We are seeing these important protest activist movements around the world. It is absolutely appalling the way that we are seeing individuals and groups of people being shot down, not just in Lebanon, in protesting against their governments. They are protesting against authoritarianism. We have seen over the years the ways in which humanitarian workers themselves have been targeted.
Yeah, in the case of Lebanon,
so a couple of things I would say.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. First of all, we need as much as possible to support those who are making the case against that form of authoritarianism. We need human rights advocates, for example, who are making sure that they are recording what is going on, because I am a firm believer that over time this will change. I think we also need to be forming alliances, and here I agree with Michelle, who said that essentially this is a political problem in Lebanon. We need to be forming alliances with those who want change, who want to bring about positive change, who care about the people of the country. It's going to be a slow, long, hard process. None of us thinks it's going to happen overnight. We know the history. We've seen what's happened. I mean, Raghida, you are wanting you're wanting immediate change, and I understand that. You are living right in the midst of it.
Valerie,
let
me explain something to you. Let me explain something to you, and I'm sure Ferid Belhaj will help me there. This is not that I'm dreaming of an immediate change. There is a horrible collapse happening. Horrible collapse. Ferid Belhaj will help me go through this. There will be no return to rebuild this country if there is no immediate action. It's not a luxurious thing that, oh yes, I would like to have an immediate result. There is no immediate intervention.
I do not see it as a luxury. Do not get me wrong. I do not see it as a luxury. But we all know, and we have seen it time and time again. We have seen countries, as it were, fall through the floor and think they cannot fall any further, and indeed they have. And I very much fear, and this is not a great message, but I very much fear that Lebanon may have to get worse before it gets better. That is not the message that I want to say to everyone. You know, I know how appalling and awful it is, but we are at a place in the world right now where there is so much that is collapsing around us that we have taken for granted, that there is a rebuilding job that needs to be done, rebuilding in a different kind of way that takes on board a lot of these challenges.
Thank you. Ferid Belhaj, a couple of quick questions, 3 quick questions, one at a time. First of all, who failed the IMF here in Lebanon? Who failed them?
Look, it is a tough question. Who failed them? I guess there was clearly not enough willingness on the part of the government to reach an agreement with the IMF. You know, we are in touch with our friends from the IMF, and clearly they came with a very clear set of suggestions. By the way, something that we discussed with them at all times with the IMF, and clearly there was no responding power on the other side of the table. So this is where we are. Now, let me say something. What I see happening now in Lebanon is an acceleration of history. I said it earlier, you know, this is self-inflicted, and it is important. Because it is self-inflicted, just a second, because it is self-inflicted, you know, whomever is in charge now cannot turn and say it's not my fault, you know. So this is where I believe that the reforms are on the right path. Second point, quickly. The RDNA, this report that we produced, was put together basically and discussed with civil society, with a large array of activists around Beirut and the greater Beirut. And it is important because that allowed us to get more of a reality check above and beyond how many buildings were destroyed. And the third point is, because of this new dynamic, you heard it, you are there. The president of parliament, the prime minister, all of them are talking about the need to rejuvenate the political system. And it is absolutely fundamental that this is, it's important that we recognize that something happened with this blast. It's not business as usual and a couple of bombings down in the south. This is happening.
Who's failing you now as the World Bank? You're extending some very interesting, okay, you succeeded with the Bisri Dam, right? Tell me about the success story. How much flack did you get for that?
Look, this is a very long story. It is a good project that at some point got derailed because of the political wrangling around it. So, as the World Bank, as us people, we listen. We listen to the civil society, and we listen to those who are telling us, look, at this particular juncture, this project does not have this necessary political and social platform that is needed. So we withdrew from it.
So quickly, a very quick one to you again, because that's being written to me. What about the electricity priority that you have been emphasizing?
Yes.
How much are you going to push for that? How much are you going to hold their feet to the fire on this one?
Well, to be very clear, it's been 20 years that we've been holding the feet of many governments to the fire because of this. Because this is something that it is not only a basic service that is not rendered to the population. It is also what is making the Lebanese economy sinking day after day. It is what's making now Lebanon the record country in a way in total indebtedness. More than 150% of GDP is level of debt. Because of what? Because of the failure of
then
the
where do we go
electricity
from there? What happens to us? Yeah. Then what happens to us with such a debt?
The debt needs to be managed, but before managing that debt, you need to manage why this debt is coming about. And it's coming about a total failure of managing the electricity sector because of all the subsidies and because of the total disconnect between the rational economy of it and, frankly, what the citizens are getting. You are living there. Yes. You are paying twice. You are paying the EDL and you are paying the private service provider, and you are paying way more than anybody around the whole region is paying for very bad service. And for what? 7-8 hours max of electricity a day? Yeah. It's a shame. 21st century Lebanon.
Michel Bachelet, see, you heard it from Ferid Belhaj. This is where I want to come back to you for the original point I wanted to make to you. When it is a situation that is so dark that, you have people in government who are leading the corruption. You have people they're playing the sectarian card, they're playing the regional card, they're playing, actually not only corruption, they are greedy. It's greed on top of everything else. And then you see the failure of the system of the electricity, of food, of money. You have no idea how bad things are here. They are so bad. And the people cannot do anything because the clique is controlling and they won't let go. How come we cannot hold them responsible? Why can't we hold them responsible, please?
No, of course they are responsible. Of course they are responsible because every government is responsible when they act in an inadequate way and when they don't act and do what they should do. So of course they're responsible. The thing is, what can you do about it? And it's about what Peter mentioned and Valerie about power internationally, but also about the national power. I mean, how can you, I believe in my case, and in COVID-19, again, shows what I believe always. I think to provide services. State has the responsibility to provide the health. I mean, of course, you can have private providers, but the responsibility is from the state to ensure the rights of the people. And that's why COVID shown that, has shown the lack of preparation of all states to respond to that thing. So of course you have to hold them accountable, but to hold them accountable and to say that they're responsible is not enough, because what you need is concrete solutions. And that's where I would have thought, for example, talking about multilateralism, that the COVID-19 would create a sensation that, look, yes, multilateralism is fundamental, and we're all going to change. We're not going to start working only on what differentiate us, but let's see what unites us and how we can push together, because we're dealing with something so big. But that was not what happened. So in Lebanon, I'm not good to give recommendations to countries when I don't know them in the details. But how can we not only? I mean, they spoke about civil society providing services, yes, but that's not the solution at the long term. You need to have the state to respond. And how can you change then the politics? I think Valerie was mentioning to support the people on the street, to support the people on to support the people's movements. But one of the things that really, I don't have the solution, sorry, Raghida, because when you have people who don't trust the authorities, and they don't trust because they have good reasons to not trust, and you have certain structures, political structures, I have been thinking to myself, what a difficult situation it is. And I guess that's why Valerie said it might go worse before it goes better. But I have to say, we need to support, I mean, people need to be supported so they continue making their voices loud. And I guess I cannot imagine there's no political party or political movement that has the right.
There is, and they're asking. Yeah, Michelle Bachelet, there is a very important political movement, several political movements here, but they get, the crackdown is incredible. It's a predetermined decision to fail them. And they are disorganized. I will give you that. I'm not telling you they're perfect. But that's why there are groups who have written to the Secretary General, I have the letter here, to say, help us. There was no investigation, no push for an independent investigation for the blast, fact-finding mission. Nobody pushed. There's no push for, at the UN. And people are saying that, how do we get your attention, Michelle Bachelet? How do we get you to think of violations of our human rights as citizens by the practices you have heard, by officials, that you can say, can leave this program and put out a very strong statement and say that is unacceptable, because the facts will stun you when you go into the details.
Well, I did that on Monday when I presented the global situation of human rights in the world. I had a statement particularly on Lebanon, on people's rights and sufferings, and the need of reforms, and the need for governments to respond. Yeah. Putting a human rights approach is centered to the response.
Yeah. I guess I'm talking about accountability much more than just that this is, I mean, if it is a violation of my human rights, do we go again to the Magnitsky Act option, which I think works? Do we go that way? Should people start to think that way instead of killing a country? Instead of killing a country.
To be honest, has been used in a very political way as well. When you like governments, you don't use it, and when you don't like governments, you use it. So it's not necessarily the best solution. I'm not sure it's the best solution, because I have seen it used only for governments that are not the friends of some government.
Wait a minute, wait a second. This is not the case in Lebanon. I think maybe you're thinking Latin America, South America. This is not the case here.
Not Lebanon. I'm talking when I have seen that action.
Yeah,
Yeah. In Latin America as well, yes.
Okay, so I think I have what? Go ahead.
I mean, what I know that in the next week there will be a discussion on the situation of the Human Rights Council, and probably there will be a resolution. But again, I'm telling you, I can have my opinions on Monday, yes. But this is the decision of member state, and that finally is a political decision.
Well, we hope that we got your attention, Michelle Bachelet, so that will be on your radar as a country that is.
Because also my deputy, she's Jordan, but her family lives in Lebanon, so we always are sort of sharing ideas.
I guess we're asking you for more, so I'm gonna just consider this like almost a closing statement, because everybody's gonna get a minute after this. And before I conclude and introduce the e-policy circle for the next one, I just want to thank you, Michelle Bachelet, for stay with us. Do not leave yet, please, for thinking of this country, putting it on your radar. And we hope that you can think further of how, this case is new, it's one of a kind. When you see that case, what can we do to make sure that the collapse is not final, that it's not detrimental? I want to go to Peter Maurer, give you 1 minute to conclude, please, Peter Maurer, with what you are walking away. What are you taking away from this discussion? What do you want us to learn from you? Where do we go from here?
Well, Raghida, what I learned is that, of course, the questions you put so strongly about accountability and legitimacy are issues we encounter in many places of the world, and we look at fragile contexts and breakdowns of systems. And when systems are breaking down and we do not immediately know how to establish accountability, how to establish legitimacy, then the strengthening of the resilience of people is sometimes a sober, modest, underwhelming recipe that we are offering, but sometimes the only one. And I fear a little bit that Lebanon, while we are not used to think about a failed states about Lebanon, we think about other contexts, we do see failure of having legitimate, accountable political systems built. And this brings us back and draws us back to what humanitarians sometimes are and where we can work. But of course, I know this is completely unsatisfactory in terms of a response, and it is no response to the accountability question. It's just a realistic assessment of where I think we are when other mechanisms fail.
Thank you very much, Peter Maurer. I think, you've heard me for years at the UN always fighting for ending impunity. It did not start with Lebanon. It's always, I've been fighting. This has been my urging for every Secretary General I've met. And guess what? It's been like, how many of them? 5 or 6 I covered. So I've been around for many years, but please keep in mind how much we have to do for ending impunity. Peter Maurer, thank you very much. Valerie Amos, I know you're strong on this one. I remember you. What can you do now in your capacity? I mean, you're a great institution. We need your thinking out of the box. Can you help us think of how do we step out of the
seconds. So I think we need to do both. We need to work to reform and strengthen our multilateral institutions, but we also need to think outside the box. And your point about impunity, we should be absolutely strong on that. And I think we should more. I mean, that is part of the pressure that we have to put on. Secondly, we need to maintain the pressure. We need to build alliances with those who want to bring about positive change. And I think that we need to have a good, long, global, these issues around accountability and legitimacy. They are the thread that hang through every single one of these issues that we are talking about in terms of the importance of multilateralism. So let's center.
Thank you, Valerie Amos. Ferid Belhaj, I'm gonna inject a question for you that, again, sorry, do you really believe that
the issues they have in Lebanon?
Yeah, we lost you, Raghida.
Second. One second. I told you this is dysfunctional country. There we are, no electricity. But maybe Farid Belhaj will fix it. Hopefully, if they keep emphasizing that electricity is not the property of one party and electricity is not the property of one man. So, I mean, basically, people are asking you as the World Bank, are you going to give money to officials who are they're calling them the thief who will take in, who has stolen the money? Are you gonna go on, or are you gonna give hope differently? Will the World Bank give differently?
Look, this is a very good question, and it's very timely, because we have, as we speak, $200 million that are ready to go for poverty alleviation as a social safety net. And as late as yesterday, we had a meeting to look at the details of how this money would be channeled directly to its beneficiaries, making sure that all fiduciary barriers, in a way, are looked at very carefully. So it's a very good question. Now, let me conclude by saying two things. One is that, it is true that Lebanon is resilient. Resiliency is part of your DNA, which is absolutely great. This being said, many of my colleagues are telling me we are fed up with being resilient. We need something else. So this is one. Second, look at how many people are gathered around this particular panel, but in general, talking about Lebanon. Lebanon is not by itself. It's not alone. And the Lebanese people have tremendous, tremendous sympathy around the world. So, I don't see Lebanon falling. I see the people of Lebanon being badly served by their governance right now, but things will evolve. Last but not least, in 2014, the president of the World Bank came to Beirut, and his message was, help us, help you. And I believe this is what Valerie, this is what Michelle, and this is what Peter are saying. Help us, help you. We cannot bring an army to invade Lebanon and to impose order. We need the Lebanese people to do what they need to do, and we are here, ready, willing, and able to help Lebanon move forward. And thank you again for the invitation.
Oh, thank you all so very much. You just honored me as friends, as incredible leaders, as important institutions. Valerie, Amos, you have to come back to Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi when you came to the first one, and then we need you for the 4th edition, hopefully in March, if COVID allows. Peter Maurer, you were with us the last time. And Sid, you're hooked. You have to come back. This is the family of Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi. And Ferid Belhaj, you wanted to come and you couldn't, so we'll hold you responsible for that. And, Michelle Bachelet, we want you with us. We'd love to have you. You are a strong force, and you're a force of a person, of a woman, and your important voice is very important. Your strong voice is important for us.
I was there for the Arab Spring meetings, but I would love to go again.
Please, we want you with us. Let me announce to you who some of them are your colleagues who will join us next Wednesday at the same time for another fabulous e-policy circle. You are the first one for the second season, which is, of course, the fall-winter season. Thank you for the honor. And the next one will be e-policy circle number 15 on September 23rd. We have your friend, I'm sure, His Excellency Danilo Turk, the former president of Slovenia. He's currently the president of the Club of Madrid. Huh? You all know that. We have Nabil Fahmy, the former foreign minister of Egypt, and of course he's the founding dean of the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the American University in Cairo. We have Richard Grenell, many of you would know as the spokesman for the US mission at that time, but he's now former director of the National Intelligence and former ambassador to Germany and envoy for Kosovo. He's been in the news quite a lot recently. And we expect that we have Andrei Fedorov, who is the chairman for the Fund for Political Research and Consulting. He was also previously a deputy foreign minister for Russia. So you honor me, love you all. Thank you for joining me. Help Lebanon. This is for Beirut. Beirut needs you. Skyline will hopefully welcome you back again, but only when we can rebuild. We cannot rebuild now. We cannot rebuild a home. I cannot rebuild my little home because the building has to be rebuilt. So until next time, this is what it was before, and this is what it is now. This is the skyline, the iconic skyline that where Beirut Institute was coming to you from. Pray for the day that we will join you from there. I thank you. I thank you very much. I thank you for supporting Beirut. Lots of love.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.